Look, it all started because I was broke. And I don't mean eating ramen for a week broke. I mean selling my own plasma and seriously considering which kidney I could live without broke. So when I found the listing for a small house on the edge of town for a price that was basically a typo, I jumped on it. I didn't even question it. That was my first mistake. The landlady, Gwen, was this wiry woman with eyes that seemed to be constantly calculating something. She gave me the tour, pointing out the leaky faucet in the kitchen and the window that didn't quite shut, all with a smile that never, ever reached her eyes. It was as we were signing the lease on the dusty hood of her car that she dropped it in, just like she was mentioning the garbage day. The last tenant, Jude, she said, not looking up from the papers. Sweet guy, a bit quiet. He just disappeared one day, left everything behind. Police came, looked around, found nothing. Weird, huh? Weird didn't cover it. A cold little knot formed in my stomach, but the number on that lease agreement was screaming louder than my survival instincts. To make matters worse, or so I thought at the time, she offered me all of Jude's leftover stuff, furniture, kitchenware, everything for an extra 200 bucks. A whole house full of stuff. My broke ass couldn't say no. It felt less like a bargain and more like she was just desperate to scrub the place clean of him, so I moved in. The first few days were just strange. I was sleeping in a dead man's bed, eating off his plates, sitting on his couch. The whole place had this faint, lingering smell of stale air in someone else's life. While clearing out a closet that was stuffed with old blankets and towels, my hand hit something hard. It was a box. Just a plain, dark wood box, maybe the size of a shoebox, with a simple lock on the front. It was surprisingly heavy. I shook it, but heard nothing rattle inside. I figured it was just old documents or something, so I tossed it on the kitchen table and tried to forget about it. I really, really tried. For a few nights, the box just sat there accusing me. Every time I walked past the kitchen table, it was like a black hole sucking all the normal thoughts out of my head. What was in it? Why was it locked? Was it something of Jude's he didn't want anyone to find? My imagination ran wild. Drugs, a confession, maybe just old love letters. The not knowing was worse than anything I could dream up. So last night, fueled by cheap whiskey and a profound sense of loneliness, I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed a flathead screwdriver from the junk drawer, Jude's junk drawer, I reminded myself, and went to work on the lock. It was surprisingly flimsy. With a pathetic little crack of splintering wood, the lid popped open. I leaned over, heart pounding with a stupid mix of guilt and anticipation, and I saw paper. Just a stack of neatly printed fur paper held together by a single black binder clip. That's it. No treasure, no dark secrets, just paper. The disappointment was so sharp it almost felt like relief. I laughed, a short, bitter sound in the dead quiet house. All that fuss for nothing. I pulled the stack out. The top page was formatted like a spreadsheet or a schedule. There were two columns side by side. The left column was headed with the name Jude. The right column was headed Dean. My blood went cold. I started reading. It was a log, a timetable with dates and timestamps that went down to the second. It detailed mundane, everyday actions. Under Jude's name, it listed things like 14:02 and 51 seconds, Jude scratches his left ear, or 19:33 and 14 seconds, Jude burns the toast. It was a log of his life from weeks ago. Then I looked at my column. It started on the day I first viewed the house. 13:45 and 2 seconds, Dean hesitates before knocking on the front door. 13:51 and 18 seconds, Dean notices the crack in the ceiling above the living room. I kept flipping, my hands starting to shake violently. It was all there, every little thing. The time I tripped on the rug. The moment I decided to order pizza instead of cooking, every single insignificant private moment logged with impossible precision. I felt sick. This had to be a prank, a sick, elaborate prank by Gwen. Then I got to yesterday's page. My eyes scanned down the list of my own recorded actions, each one sending a fresh wave of nausea through me. And then I saw it, the last entry for the day. 21:47 and 12 seconds, Dean adjusts the crooked picture frame on the mantelpiece. I stopped breathing. I remembered that moment perfectly. I'd been pacing around the living room, feeling watched, feeling that creepy-crawly sensation you get when you're alone but don't feel alone. My eyes had landed on an old, faded photo of a coastline that Jude had left on the mantel. It was slightly askew. I'd walked over and straightened it, and for a split second, I'd had the most intense, irrational feeling that if I turned around, someone would be standing right behind me. I had dismissed it as my imagination running wild in this creepy house, but it was here. Written down, timed to the exact second, before I even did it. The box wasn't a record. It was a script, and I was just the new actor reading Jude's old lines. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with the papers scattered on my chest, my neck stiff and my head pounding from the whiskey. For a blissful, groggy second, I thought it was all a nightmare. Then I saw the broken box on the table and the cold, hard reality crashed back in. I scrambled to gather the pages, my hands still trembling. The last page was yesterday's log. The timetable ended there was nothing for today. A sliver of hope, thin and fragile, pierced through my panic. Maybe it was over. Maybe it was just a record of the past, some high-tech surveillance log left behind by a paranoid Jude. I spent the morning trying to convince myself of this, trying to rationalize it. It was a prank. Gwen was watching me, there were cameras, that had to be it. I almost managed to calm myself down. Then around 9 I went to the kitchen to make coffee and my heart stopped. Sitting on top of the stack of papers, perfectly aligned, was a new sheet. Freshly printed, it hadn't been there an hour ago, I know it hadn't. The printer Jude left behind was unplugged in the corner, covered in dust. With a sense of dread so profound it felt like I was wading through cement, I picked it up. Today's date was at the top, and below it the neat columns with my name and a blank space where Jude's used to be. The first few entries were already filled in, logging my waking up, my pathetic attempt at rationalization. And then, a little further down the list, was a line for the future. 9:15 and 30 seconds, Dean is startled by the neighbor's dog knocking over the delivery box. I stared at the words, my mind racing. No, absolutely not. I was not going to let this thing, whatever it was, dictate my actions. I was in control, I would prove it. I decided then and there I would become a prisoner in my own home. I wouldn't go outside, I wouldn't answer the door, I wouldn't get anywhere near a dog or a delivery box. I spent the day barricaded inside, peering out the windows like a lunatic, my anxiety coiling tighter and tighter in my gut. By late afternoon, I was a wreck, but I was also weirdly triumphant. Nothing had happened, the timetable was wrong, I had beaten it. That's when I heard the knock, my whole body tensed. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. It was a delivery guy, looking confused and holding a small package. Not for me. I saw the name on the label was for the house across the street. A surge of defiant energy shot through me. I was going to open the door and tell this guy he had the wrong address. I was going to take an action that wasn't on the list. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, a smug little speech ready on my lips. Sorry, you've got the wrong. I never finished the sentence. From the yard next door, a flash of brown fur exploded out of the bushes. The neighbor's beagle, a yappy little thing I'd seen them walking, must have slipped its leash. It shot across my lawn, barking its head off, right towards the delivery guy. He yelped and jumped back, startled. In doing so, he stumbled into me. I staggered backward, my arms windmilling, and crashed into the small hall table I'd set up by the door. On that table was a single Amazon box, a delivery from 2 days ago that I hadn't gotten around to opening. It tumbled to the floor with a loud thud. The dog, its job done, trotted happily back to its owner, who was yelling apologies from across the street. The delivery guy muttered a curse, picked up his package, and hurried off. I was left standing in my doorway, staring at the overturned box on the floor. I slowly raised my wrist and looked at my watch. 9:15 and 30 seconds, exactly, that was it. The moment my brain just broke, the floor fell out from under me. All the theories about pranks and cameras evaporated, leaving behind a pure crystalline terror. This wasn't a trick, this was something else, something impossible that was actually happening. I felt like a bug trapped in a jar and someone was just tapping on the glass, watching me scurry around. I couldn't stay in that house, not alone. I grabbed my laptop, stuffed the timetable papers into my backpack. I couldn't bear to leave them, but I couldn't bear to look at them either, and drove to a 24-hour diner on the other side of town. I needed to be around people, to see normal life happening, just to remember it still existed. I sat in a sticky booth for hours, nursing the same cup of burnt coffee, the frantic energy of the diner a stark contrast to the cold, silent dread in my chest. I had to tell someone, but who? The police. They'd think I was insane. Friends, they'd think the same thing, so I did what any desperate, terrified person in the 21st century does. I turned to the internet. I found a forum for unexplained phenomena, a place where people shared stories of ghosts and glitches in the Matrix. My story would probably seem tame compared to some of them. Under a throwaway username, I started typing. Title: I found a timetable that controls my life and belonged to a guy who vanished. I think I'm next. I poured everything out. The ridiculously cheap rent, the weird landlady Gwen, the story of the missing tenant Jude. I described the box, the impossible accuracy of the timetable, the experiment with the dog and the delivery box. I wrote about the feeling of being watched, of having no free will, of living inside a pre-written script that ended, for the last guy, in a literal disappearance. I reread my post and it sounded like the ravings of a madman, but it was all true. I ended the post with a desperate plea. What do I do? Do I burn it? Do I follow it? Do I try to fight it? Has anyone ever heard of anything like this? I keep thinking about Gwen. She knew Jude disappeared. She sold me his stuff for practically nothing. Is she involved? Is she watching me? I feel like I'm losing my mind. I hit post and just stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was out there now. My insane, impossible secret was floating in the digital ether. And all I could do was wait for someone, anyone, to tell me I wasn't completely alone in this nightmare. The replies started trickling in within minutes. My post blew up. Most people were skeptical, of course. Cool story, bro, one said. You should write a book. A lot of people suggested I had a carbon monoxide leak and was hallucinating. I almost wished it were that simple. But then, buried amongst the trolls and the wannabe doctors were the replies that took me seriously, and they were terrifying. They latched onto the idea of surveillance. Check for cameras. Now, one user, let's call him Signal to Noise, wrote, forget the supernatural stuff for a second. The simplest explanation is a human one. Someone is messing with you on a whole other level. They're watching you, logging your behavior, and using predictive software or just good old-fashioned observation to print those pages. The dog thing could have been a setup. They could have let the dog out at the perfect time. You need to sweep that house from top to bottom. The idea, as horrifying as it was, felt solid. It was a branch I could grab onto in a sea of paranormal chaos. A human enemy was something I could understand, something I could fight, so I drove back to the house, a new, angry kind of energy coursing through me. I was no longer a victim of some cosmic entity. I was the target of a sick, twisted person. And my money was on Gwen. It had to be her. She owned the property. She knew the layout. She was the one who told me about Jude. I spent the next several hours tearing the place apart. I wasn't gentle. I pulled books off shelves, tapped walls, lifted rugs. I felt like a crazed detective in a movie, fueled by paranoia and cheap diner coffee. For hours, I found nothing. The disappointment was crushing. Maybe I was just crazy after all. And then in the study, behind a row of Jude's old, musty textbooks on architectural history, I found it. A tiny, pinprick-sized hole in the back of the bookshelf. My heart leaped into my throat. I wrenched the heavy bookshelf away from the wall, the wood scraping loudly against the floor. There, nestled in a crudely drilled hole in the plaster, were the severed wires of a removed pinhole camera. It was old, the wires clipped and dusty. It hadn't been active in a long time. A wave of vindication washed over me. I wasn't crazy. Signal to Noise was right. There was a camera. Someone had been watching this room, but the relief was short-lived. The camera was dead. It couldn't be responsible for the constantly updating timetable. As I stood there staring at the dead wires, my theory began to crumble. That's when I decided to go through the rest of Jude's belongings with a different eye. I wasn't just clearing out his stuff anymore. I was conducting an investigation. In the bottom of a wardrobe, under a pile of old clothes that still smelled faintly of him, I found a worn leather notebook. I flipped it open. It was filled with Jude's handwriting, but it wasn't a diary, it was research. Page after page was filled with strange, geometric symbols, astronomical charts, and frantic-looking notes about ley lines, temporal mechanics, and something he called anchoring events. He'd been studying something. Something esoteric and strange. He'd underlined phrases like observational causality and the script of the universe. One page in particular made me feel sick. It was a drawing of the very room I was standing in, the study. But in the drawing, the walls were covered in those same bizarre symbols, all converging on a single point in the center of the room. At the bottom of the page, he had written a single, chilling sentence. Observation doesn't just record the path, it said. It creates it. To escape the page, you must leave the stage. The two discoveries crashed into each other in my mind, creating a paradox that made my head spin. A dead camera and a notebook full of what looked like occult madness. Was this a high-tech surveillance prank, or was I living in the epicenter of some kind of ritual gone wrong? Was Gwen a sociopath with a camera system, or was she just the oblivious landlord of a house that was fundamentally broken? I had two clues, one pointing to a rational human evil and the other pointing to something far, far older and stranger. And I had no idea which one was the truth. They both felt real. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the dead camera's wires on the coffee table on one side, Jude's notebook on the other. Human malice versus cosmic horror. My brain felt like a tennis ball being whacked back and forth between the two. Every creak of the old house was either Gwen sneaking around outside or the house itself groaning under the weight of some unseen law. Just before midnight, I heard the soft whirring sound. I knew what it was, the printer in the study. A new page was being born. I walked in, my feet feeling like lead. The single sheet was sitting in the output tray, a stark white rectangle in the dim light. I didn't want to pick it up. I swear to God, I stood there for a full 5 minutes just staring at it, bargaining with a universe I wasn't even sure existed. Please be blank, please be blank. It wasn't blank. I finally snatched it up. My eyes scanned the entries for the upcoming day, the usual list of mundane predictions. But my focus was drawn to the bottom of the page, to the last entry. My blood turned to ice water. It was a log for Jude. His column, which had been empty for days, was suddenly back. There was only one entry, next to a date from 2 months ago, the day Gwen said he vanished. October 17th, 22:30 and 0 seconds. Jude enters the basement. End of log. My breath hitched. My eyes darted to my own column. Next to today's date, December 17th, there was a matching entry. December 17th, 22:30 and 0 seconds. Dean enters the basement. This was different. This wasn't a prediction of a clumsy accident or a choice of meal. This felt like a command, a final appointment, the basement. The one place Gwen had explicitly told me not to go. It's damp, the door is warped, you'll lock yourself in, she'd said with that thin smile. Now I knew why. A wave of pure, defiant rage washed over my fear. I was not going to be herded like an animal to the slaughter. I was not going to walk into that basement at 10:30 p.m. just because a piece of haunted paper told me to. I was going to break the pattern. I looked at the clock. It was just past midnight. I had almost 22 hours until my scheduled appointment. But Jude's notebook lay open on the desk. To escape the page, you must leave the stage. What if waiting was the trap? What if following the schedule, even by defying it at the right time, was still playing the game? A crazy, desperate idea formed in my mind. The only way to truly break the script was to rip it up entirely. To go to the one place I was forbidden to go at a time of my own choosing. I wasn't going to be Dean, the next actor in the play. I was going to be the guy who storms the stage in the middle of the first act and sets the whole theater on fire. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer, my knuckles white. I was terrified. I was more scared than I have ever been in my entire life. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control. This was my choice, not the papers, my choice. I walked to the heavy wooden door in the hall, the one that led to the basement. I turned the cold, brass knob. It was time to see where the last act of Jude's story really took place. Final update, I'm out. I'm writing this from a cheap motel room 3 towns over. It smells like stale cigarettes and bleach, and it's the most beautiful place I've ever been. I'm not sure if I'm safe, but I'm free, I think. I went into the basement. I didn't wait for the scheduled time. I went right then. The door wasn't warped. It opened with a low groan. The air that hit me was cold and smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic and wrong, like old blood. There was no body. I swept my flashlight beam across the darkness, expecting to find Jude's remains, but there was nothing. The basement was empty except for one thing. A single, straight-backed wooden chair sitting in the exact center of the stone floor. It was facing a blank wall. I walked closer, my light trembling. The wall the chair was facing was a mess. There were holes drilled everywhere, a spiderweb of old, clipped wires hanging out, the central hub for a massive, now dismantled surveillance system. Gwen or someone had been watching this place like a hawk. The rational explanation. But painted on the same wall surrounding the holes in the wires were Jude's symbols, dozens of them scrawled in a dark, reddish-brown substance that I refused to believe was paint. They spiraled inward, all pointing to the spot on the wall directly in front of the chair. The supernatural explanation. The two realities were right there, literally overlapping. I don't know what happened to Jude. Was he kidnapped by a psycho who watched him on cameras? Or did he conduct some ritual that made him dissolve? Did he leave the stage? I just stood there in that awful silent room and realized I would never know. The ambiguity was the point. I didn't stay long. I ran. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, and the timetable. I didn't pack anything else. I got in my car and just drove. About an hour ago, I pulled over, took the stack of papers, and lit them on fire in a rusty oil drum behind a gas station. I don't know what happens now. The timetable never showed anything past the moment I was supposed to enter the basement. Maybe because I went in early, I broke the loop. Or maybe I just haven't seen the next page yet. I didn't dare look. I don't know if I'm finally free or if I just started a new, unwritten chapter of the same horrible story. All I know is the script is gone, and for now that's enough.